Hi, everyone. Welcome to another webinar in our series of webinars. This one is all about in-house insights for enterprise leaders, but really legal leaders in general. As we know, it's very important for enterprise companies to have skilled and experienced legal teams that can effectively address any issues that arise and really provide proactive legal counsel to everyone in the company and beyond. With that, I do want to cover a few housekeeping items. One, this webinar is being recorded, so you all will receive the recording and the slides afterward. So if you do have to drop off for any reason, that's totally fine. You will still receive all of the materials to bring back to your teams. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box. We will get to as many as possible. If we don't get to everything, we promise we will reach out to you after and answer those questions. And with that, I just want to go over a few objectives for today. One, we really want you to take away understanding risks and challenges that all legal leaders face in today's landscape, tactics to align with stakeholders within your legal team and beyond, how to work together with other teams just to make sure that everything is moving forward the way it should be, and then tips for implementing CLM. I think that is, a big thing that's on many of our minds. So that is something we will be covering today. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Ashley and Tim to introduce themselves. I'm so excited to have both of you here today.
I'm so excited to be here today and honored to be a part of this. So I'm Ashley Adams. I'm the Director of Legal Operations at Contentful. I have about 16 years, I counted it today, it made me a little nervous when I actually did the math, about 16 years of corporate experience. I've been in large organizations and now I'm at a much smaller organization. I was at Nissan and at Assuring for some time, so very large global operations. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about all of the things. I've been in a wide variety of roles. So if you looked at my LinkedIn profile, I've been in HR, I've been in procurement/purchasing, I've been in legal, I've been in marketing for a little bit of time. So I have a wide view and a very broad background on what it takes to kind of do some of these things.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. My name is Tim Bryan. I manage the voice of customer team here at LinkSquares, and I may not be on a legal team itself, but I have had the pleasure of working with hundreds of customers during my time as a CSM here before moving to voice of customer, and then working with even more customers, making sure we can drive our roadmap forward with our product team based off our customer experiences as well.
Awesome, thank you both. All right, let's dive in. Let's first start with some challenges that legal teams face. So whether you're a team of 5 or 5,000 or 50,000 for that matter, you're likely going to be facing a lot of challenges within your organization. I'd love to hear from you both, and maybe Ashley, if you want to start, maybe some challenges that you see within legal teams, maybe even like your experience at huge companies, really what that looks like.
So I think the number one bullet on here is budget restrictions and resource capacity. I think we're all facing that at this point in time. I think it's maybe the magnitude that it presents itself depending on the size of your organization. I've been in places where I've had to do multiple budget revisions, such as large places like Nissan, and it's a very controlled process. And I've been at places where it's a little less controlled and you've got some more freedom to make some decisions around budget, but it's still a very restricted process. You only have so much money to spend. I'd say some of the other challenges that we're facing around that are resources. So, we are a small legal team for the most part where I'm currently at, and there are capacity constraints. There's only so much that we can do within a day's time. And I think regardless of if you're in a 200-person legal team or in a 5-person legal team, you're going to feel some sort of constraint based on the volume and the asks that are coming at you on an hourly, minute-by-minute basis.
Yeah, and the budget especially, I see this all the time working with customers, is that their tech stack is most often comprised of just ad hoc tools. Some are under legal budget, but most are coming from other departments, whether it's using Jira or Monday.com from IT or marketing. to manage legal tasks, really having to make do with what you have available while trying to justify the increase of budget to procure more legal technology, which in this economy it's no easy task whatsoever.
No, I think I can attest to that from my own personal experience of having to use enterprise tools that may not necessarily be the right fit for your team and figuring out how to make them work within what you have. We do that today for sure.
Yeah, then trying to get the right output out of them, trying to change the process internally with using those tools, it's no easy venture.
And the data that you're collecting from them, is it reliable? Is it not? Depending on the human element, because most of those tools require some sort of human input. It's not fail-proof by any means.
Definitely. And Ashley, I know you just mentioned using data. What challenges do you find really within that data?
So I go with the concept of junk in and junk out. So, data quality is really important. So it depends on what you're putting into the system, what you're looking at, where it's stored, who is putting it in. Is it a controlled process, or is it something that's systematic where multiple systems are, providing inputs in different places? Is it automated in some way? Are you building dashboards? And there's that element of data privacy and security that we're all concerned with. And I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there. We are all asked to do something with generative AI in some way. Most legal teams are facing that. And so there's this balance of innovation versus risk. We want to be innovative. We want to be efficient. We want to provide the best service that we can to all of our business partners and teams that we support. But then there's that element of, I can't put confidential contract data into ChatGPT. I just can't. And so finding a tool or a platform that allows me to incorporate AI into my workflow and also still manage the risk. And one of the things that I would say is that if you have a legal help desk or a ticketing system, one way you could do that would be a chatbot. That is a quick and easy way to get AI into your workflow. And it will give you some interesting data points about potentially, a knowledge base or FAQs or self-service, and opening up those opportunities for your business partners.
Yeah.
I think generative AI is either a godsend or a four-letter word, depending on who you're asking about it. One of the things we hear constantly from customers is just a fear that their confidential and very personal and unique data from their contracts is being fed into training models for ChatGPT or other tools to really take their experiences, then take all the benefits from them as well. It's a huge industry at the moment, but it has to be done correctly. And then the implementation of using that data that can be exported out of it has to be done very thoughtfully in the right way as well.
Yeah, and I think that's something, one of the challenges that we have on here is that, the data privacy and security risks. How do you kind of mitigate that, or what do you see as the biggest challenges right now that you do have to mitigate, Ashley?
I think it's understanding how people are wanting to use it, and kind of collating that into a centralized place so that it's controlled, adding and creating AI policies. I know that's a big thing that we're facing and other teams are facing that I've talked to, in bigger, smaller companies. And, incorporating AI into your product. So if you're selling a product to customers, LinkSquares being a great example of this, or any other tech company, how are you incorporating AI into your own product to benefit your consumer of that? And I think that's another piece that we're all trying to figure out. And there's no expert in this. There's no one right way. And I think that's the interesting thing, is that we're all learning as we go and figuring it out, which can be a little scary if I do say so myself.
Yeah, and I think the consumption of that data, I personally have never met a lawyer that fully trusts AI. So it's really figuring out for your department, your team, or you personally, how can you use AI to create efficiencies while still making sure you have that review in place from a legal standpoint to make sure there's no miscommunication or mistranslation as well.
And with, kind of in that same vein with the data privacy and security, I know, different teams like to use different things. What are kind of the issues with, or the challenges using different technology and having everybody siloed into different tech, what kind of data privacy and security issues does that really present?
Well, for one, you're working in a silo. So that's kind of the number one issue that you have to address. I think the other piece of it is what I'm using a piece of technology for in the legal team and what, let's just say my procurement team, for example, may be using a similar but different tool for is the pieces of information that are coming in and out of that system, where they live, who has access to those. And if the technologies are siloed and the teams are also siloed, then those technologies aren't talking to each other. So data is not being written in multiple places. So there's inconsistencies. So let's just say, for example, I'm reporting on revenue, but also the finance team is reporting on revenue, but they're using a different tool or a different system to do so. There may be inconsistencies in what we're reporting out. And then there's this whole, who do I believe? Do I believe what the legal team is telling me based on the deals that are coming through? Or do I believe the finance team or deal desk or whoever it is based on the tool that they're using? So, I mean, there's some serious challenges with inconsistency and security and permissions and reliability of what you're getting in and out of those systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'd be curious to hear too, the different challenges that you see working, at a smaller company versus a very, very large company. I know when we were preparing for this webinar, something that you mentioned was, more locations, more geographical area. When companies grow, there are a lot of different things that you have to be more realistic about and understand that those could be challenges. So I'm just interested to hear really the difference in rules depending on company size. What are the challenges there?
So a good example of this would be the amount of self-service that's available. So I've been in a large company where the business partners, the different departments, they pretty much wrote their own contracts. There's some parameters obviously that are given, but for the most part, you had your purchasing agent if you're buying something and yourself with a few guidelines, and you wrote your own contracts. It was very self-service. The legal team was very limitedly involved unless there was something major like risk or employment. I'll give a good example there. Like if there's an employment issue, you'd certainly want to engage with your legal team. But for the most part, you were kind of on your own. Kind of flipping into a smaller company, there's more control in place because a lot of the processes aren't defined yet. You have younger talent, for example. This might be someone's first job, so there may be less opportunity for self-service, and I think that can grow over time. And it all depends on the company too. I mean, there are different rules depending on if it's regulated. So if you're in a regulated industry, sometimes regulatory requirements will make it a lot harder to create self-service or to allow people to kind of be on their own without some legal involvement. Where in other cases, the risk appetite allows for it, for example. So the approach to risk may be different.
Yeah, I love the point about the smaller offices. You're able to do more quickly. You're able to be much more just responsive and reflexive and change process because it impacts less people. Whereas obviously the larger companies, especially with different regions or satellite offices, change management is just a monster. It's like herding cats. And really what I've seen work best is with companies I've worked with, making sure we can at least identify champions who are willing to adopt that process early and use them to have that train the trainer approach, where they can then become subject matter experts on that new process and take some pressure off of legal operations and try not to make them the bad people forcing this change for no reason, but making sure they can see the why, the reason behind the change and how it benefits them as well.
When you touch on something very interesting there, Tim, is the why and the concept of champions and maybe even naysayers. And I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's a benefit to having both as a part of the process. And also that idea of bringing people along on the journey. You are not doing this alone. You're not working in a silo. There's upstream and downstream to everything that we do. And so if you bring people along, sometimes the change management is a little easier, but also it depends on the size of the org.
Definitely. So I think that really covers a lot of, the challenges that everyone is facing. And I know we started touching upon really resolving these challenges. So let's talk about mitigating and what a go-forward approach would be. Can you first maybe actually talk about a data-driven approach that you've taken to really resolve these challenges that we've talked about, whether, it's working with internal teams, finding those stakeholders? How do you approach that?
So I like to do a couple of things. It's very methodical. I like to do a listening tour. And if I'm tackling something new or building a process, I need to understand the pain points. And in order to do that, I can't just sit within my own org. So, legal is a business partner, a support function. It is a revenue advocate, or revenue adjacent in some ways. And so we're not alone. And so in order to enact change and to build a process, you have to talk to people. And what my pain points are not necessarily what finance or sales or the people team or HR, depending on where you're at. And so if you understand the pain points from all angles, it will also help you identify the key stakeholders, kind of that second bullet point there, and getting the right people in the room to have the conversation.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's really reminiscent of a 30, 60, 90-day approach. Those first 30 days, you're going in to understand that pain and to start triaging what the thresholds of that pain are. What's most important? What can I tackle first? 60 days, you're going in with some proposals on what these changes could look like, and then 90 days ultimately rolling out. But being able to explain to every stakeholder that's a part of this journey with you why we're tackling one priority over the other, and then showing the impacts and that clear path forward. No one's going to be happy. Not everyone's going to be happy, but who can we make the happiest, the fastest, based off those pains themselves?
And sometimes it's small pain points you're tackling, but also as a part of that, I think you have to be willing to fail fast.
Yep.
Sometimes the best solutions come out of that perceived failure. So we've tried something. It didn't exactly work the way that all of us thought it would, but man, did we learn so much, and we can move and we can go faster. And getting people comfortable with that element of discomfort, because it can be a little like, oh, well, we didn't do a very good job, or we didn't hit what we thought we would. No, that's okay. It's a part of the process.
Exactly. And when I think about onboarding any new tool, what I always see work best, regardless if it's LinkSquares, I'm biased, I work here, or other tools, being able to have a small focus group at first where people are willing to fail and willing to take that critical feedback and rethink the process for the betterment of the usage or the adoption. It's so important. Whereas if too many people get too involved too quickly, you're trying to control everything at once. Everyone's input is coming at you left, right, and sideways. And it's so difficult to have that failure and have that meaningful failure.
I'm curious to hear too. So, we do a lot of webinars, and one of our past webinars was all about M&A and how to decide who really the stakeholders are and who do you bring in for that. And I'm curious to hear, how do you identify like really who those people are depending upon the project, whether it's implementing technology, maybe that's a different key stakeholder, or an M&A project, maybe that's a different one. How do you approach really finding those people? I know you talked about understanding the pain points first, but sometimes it's different based on the project. So how does that differ between projects?
I would say for me, sometimes it's understanding who the decision makers are. So if I'm needing to get a decision made, who are those individuals based on the org that's going to be impacted depending on the process or the technology or the change that we're trying to implement. I would say the other piece of it, and you said M&A, so I'll get to that, is the confidentiality level. So where are we operating at? M&A is a very tightly controlled process for any company, and there are very limited groups of individuals who are involved with those transactions. And sometimes even in your own legal team, you can't even talk about it. I've been a part of that where it was a small working group and it had a special project name and we couldn't talk about it. So you're held to some level of confidentiality. So I think there's a piece of that depending on what you're implementing. I would say the other side of it is, you've got your naysayers, you've got your champions, but you've also got this group in the middle that don't fall into either bucket. And so how do they fit into the picture of what you're implementing, what you're trying to change? Getting them involved, in some way.
And that's where I think
Most of the time they're your everyday users too. So
in that middle group, that's where I think the vendors can help in or can jump in, where if you're able to understand your vendor and what lengths they're willing to go to partner with you and partner with your end users as well, how can we leverage the vendor experience to really go in and start driving adoption rates based on best practices, custom guides, trainings, whatever it may be, but trying to deflect some of that attention to detail to the partners to make that process much easier.
And those people who aren't necessarily as involved in those special projects, I know one thing that that keeps coming up is really keeping people engaged and keeping talent. I know that's a challenge. So what ways can everyone, on the call take something back to their team, to keep people engaged, to really do a skills analysis? What's the best approach there to get people involved in those special projects?
So talent development, career development is something that I'm supremely engaged with my current team, with former teams. I did spend some time in HR, and it's very important to me. And so you mentioned it here. So there's a skills analysis component. So we all come into the organization with various backgrounds. And one of the things that I would recommend is what I call a skills matrix. And so, for example, I've hired a commercial attorney. I've hired them to do commercial work. They're doing transactions on go-to-market legal. However, they may have had corporate experience or privacy experience or other practice areas. I might not know that because I've hired them to do a specific task. But if I do a skills matrix, I'm asking them to identify all of the areas that they may have expertise in and also the areas that they may want to develop. So if a project does come through, I can say, hey, yeah, Tim, he really wants to do privacy. Man, let me give him that development opportunity and that stretch assignment. And it goes back to the concept of budget restriction and resource capacity. So if you're using your whole team and utilizing all of their skills, it opens up opportunities for development in ways that you may not get upward mobility. If you're in a small legal team, there's not always a promotion, there's not always another job to go to. But if I'm being developed, it's a way to engage and retain good talent. And if I'm being challenged.
Yeah, I think it comes down to really knowing them as people as well. What's going to challenge them in the right way? How can we use that to maybe get them on special teams or special projects that's going to push all those buttons, give them more intrinsic enjoyment, especially on those smaller teams where ultimately there won't be that immediate upward mobility where larger teams could have more flexibility in that standpoint.
Can I give them visibility? Do they need exposure to executive leadership? Are they wanting to build presentation skills, for example? So do I have them be a part of an implementation group where they do the readouts to key stakeholders? That's an opportunity that you can provide development for them.
Exactly, and giving them that exposure as well, it's invaluable.
Actually, I see that we had a question come in, and it is, how do I make the case for building my legal team?
Oh, that's a loaded question. So in any situation where you're building a business case to ask for headcount, I think you have to be clear on what you're asking for. So, am I asking for full-time headcount? Am I asking for contract headcount? What are the business needs that are driving this? Is it volume, for example? Am I getting a lot of contracts? And that goes into the whole point about data. So is it a trend? Like all of a sudden, am I seeing volume, or am I seeing volume every year in July for the last 3 years? Okay, maybe that's an opportunity that we could bring in, some contract work or some seasonal type help into our team. Or is it something that is presenting itself month over month? That's a way to do it. Are projects being delayed? For example, are we missing KPIs? Are we missing objectives? That's a way to look at bringing in additional headcount into your team. But I think you have to be clear about what you're looking for, what skills you need, who you're wanting to hire, the type of work that you need to hire for, and then knowing who you need to talk to, because it's usually a long process when you're thinking about talent strategy and hiring strategy. So it takes us, we build out, I'm trying to think of a good example. So when we think about headcount strategy, I usually build that out for the year. Now it does ebb and flow, but I try to think about my team long term and build those points in. And so, I have to get ahead of that most of the time, and knowing who to talk to. Does it go beyond just your immediate leader? Is it, higher up the chain, for example, of approvals? So you've got to be really clear about all of those things in order to actually have the business case ready.
And I think I love the point you made about just using the data, looking at the KPIs. Maybe if we think about it from a contracting perspective, showing here's all the work that I'm doing right now. And if I'm able to add 1, 2, 3 more people, here's the impact it's going to have on the business and towards our business objectives. But then here's how I can start moving into more strategic endeavors. And here's what that path would look like. And trying to sell that future vision, but a realistic one, of course, but showing the impacts both today and tomorrow on what that would bring.
What I think also too is also showing what it's going to be like if we don't hire. So what are the outcomes going to be if we don't actually hire our, this person or that person? The negative impact. Are we going to miss revenue? Are our contract times going to continually decline? Our SLAs and turnarounds? Setting expectations very clearly around what could happen.
Yeah, if there's clear signs of burnout, what's going to happen with one less person if we have a smaller team? That doomsday approach I've seen work very well with some customers I've worked with as well.
I have to, actually.
Great. Tim, you took the words right out of my mouth when you were talking about, KPIs and, using the data to really make that case. And Ashley, I think you really touched upon that as well. And here we are just to talk about, those data-driven decisions. And Ashley, I'd really love to hear what data you use just across your day-to-day, in your role.
So I use a lot of different types of data. I look at spend, quite a bit. I will say, I have a pretty tight control on our financials. So I'm looking at spend constantly. Where are we spending? Who are we spending with? If we're using outside counsel or if we're using an alternative legal service. The other side of it is, just contract volume in general. Inbound, outbound, customer, partner, NDAs, and so on. So I'm looking at that. I'm also looking at, for example, if you have a help desk or a ticketing system, the tickets that are coming through, who are they coming from? What orgs are asking us to do the most amount of work? Are we seeing a spike from marketing, for example, or are we seeing a spike from our people team? And what's driving that? Is it times of year? The other piece of it that I'm also looking at is OKRs. How are we measuring up against our objectives, and how do those stack up to where we are from a company perspective, and do they align? Are we doing the right work at the right time? All of those things are very important, to what I do on a day-to-day basis.
Great. Sorry about the light. We're very eco-friendly here. The light shut off. Yeah, that's all great. Using that data just to, the point that we made before, really about just using the data to make sure that you can get the headcount that you need, to get the technology that you need. And Tim, it looked like you were about to say something as well.
Yeah, I think just using the data makes everything objective. You're not playing a blame game. You're just showing the objective impact that any process is having and being able to use that to justify the end game. Takes emotion out of the equation. In a perfect world, some people could get offended, but that will happen no matter what in some cases. But it really just helps visualize the impact that your team is having, or that the impact your team could make. It goes such a long way in making those conversations much more streamlined.
It helps you tell your story too. I think there's the other, it's great to have all the numbers and all the data and information in front of you, but what story are you trying to drive as a result of these pieces of information? So they go hand in hand with each other. They're not just, well, I have this dashboard, it's pretty. I look at it on a day-to-day basis. No, what story am I actually telling? What narrative am I driving for? Is it headcount? Is it, different turnaround times? Do I need another piece of technology, for example, to help us be more efficient? Data is there to help you tell your story.
Especially if you have that willingness to dive into that data if you fail. What
Yeah.
story is there? Why did we fail? Was it because of process? Did we miss something critical and miss our SLAs? But it really helps provide that continuous improvement stream at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Well, I know we're wrapping up here, and I just want to make sure we get to a few questions before we head out. So if anybody has any other questions, please drop them in the questions box. But we do have a couple that I would love to touch on. Let's see. This is a good one. We are constantly being asked to do more with less. How can I measure success while operating at a lower budget?
Okay, another loaded question. Man, we're getting a lot of loaded questions today. I think success, depending on your team, is measured by the results that you're driving for. So, regardless of how much money you have to spend and resource capacity, it comes down to what are you driving for in terms of results. So, for example, if you're looking to measure 30% response efficiency, or you're looking to reduce the number of emails coming into an alias by having a ticketing system, it's looking at those things, to help you drive the type of result you're looking for and the performance that you want to get. I would say in my case, having worked with limited budgets pretty significantly throughout my whole career, it is figuring out the balance. So what are my priorities? What's in my list of things that I need to get done? Can I spend the money now, or do I need to wait? Is there a lower cost solution? Could I do a proof of concept, for example, to help me get those results, but maybe at a lower cost? Are there less people that I can involve that won't take time away from other priorities that we need to solve for? So I think it's being clear about your priorities and the results that you're looking to drive.
I think it comes down to knowing your limits as well. Just being very understanding of what you can and can't accomplish in any day, week, or quarter, and being able to communicate out expectations as a result and set those very clearly up front and take away some of the finger pointing that could happen after the fact.
I think one of the things that we didn't touch on completely was the being flexible with each other. Most of the deadlines we have are internal to ourselves or to our teams, and so those can shift, especially if you have a justifiable reason. And so I think it's the one, communicating and getting everybody okay with that.
Definitely. Well, we are at time, and I want to make sure that we answered pretty much everything here. Again, if we didn't get to all of the questions, we will reach out after. But I really want to thank both of you, Tim and Ashley, for joining today and providing so many valuable insights. And we look forward to the next one. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.